A lot of different terms get thrown around the RPG hobby, and for anyone who's new, it can be overwhelming for them. And one of those terms is rules light. What does it mean, and why is there so much conversation on what is and is not a rules light game? Is a rules light game a tabletop that it has a small book with little content but dense rules? Say, a game like World of Dungeons, which can fit onto 1 to 2 pages. Is it a book filled with history and setting, but the rules are super simple to the point where a 5-year-old could understand them? Or does it depend on the game specific? For example, what if you're playing a Dungeons & Dragons 5e game, but in a very low magic campaign? Or a Pathfinder 2e game, but in a very low magic campaign? Are they technically rules light at that point? Well, the question and the answer is a lot more complicated than one would think. And today I'm going to be talking about what is a rules light game and why it's so complicated to answer with a simple yes or no. So, when you first hear the term rules light, it's generally thrown around previously in tabletop RPG spaces in reference to a game or a system. For example, some people might call D&D 5e a rules light game, especially when there's no magic involved. Or some people call Powered by the Apocalypse games generally rules light. Or some people might call games such as Dread, Our Last Best Hope, or even The Warren as rules light games. And could they be right? Yes. Could they be wrong? Yes. It really does depend on the conversation, and it depends on the players and GMs who are playing the game and how they play it. Now, are there some games that lean more into rules light? Yes. Honestly, most PBTA games are going to lean into rules light better than, say, Traveler 2E, which is more complicated. Speaking of which, what defines a rules light tabletop RPG? As I mentioned before, there are no hard and fast rules on what defines a rules light tabletop RPG, but there are some general caveats I think a lot of RPG gamers will agree. And the first one is that your game has to have some ease of memorization to the rules and metrics, alongside the fact that it needs to be effective at quickly, easily, and logically handling common situations in your game. I think D&D 5e can be rules light if done in a kind of proper, quote-unquote, way. If you remove a lot of the magic from D&D, and you just have it back down to its bare bones, and your characters are levels 1 through 5, you could make a rules light game. You don't need much to run D&D if all your characters are non-casters, and all you do is bonk stuff on the head. That isn't too complicated, and most players can get that kind of rules. What, all you have to really roll are 1d20s, and maybe a 1d4 or 1d6, and some other dice, alongside understanding some common rules such as distance and character creation. Yes, is it kind of teetering the edge of maybe a rules medium game? Depends on how you argue it, but it can be rules light. Whereas games such as Dread is literally an entire box and a couple pages. Anyone and everyone could learn that game within a matter of minutes, maybe 45 to an hour at most. Or we're talking about maybe Apocalypse World. That is only a couple pages. That game you can learn within a short amount of time, and all resolutions are done in 2d6. Alongside that fact, I also think character creation should be taken into account. If character creation can be done quickly and effectively without too much hassle, then I also consider that a rules light game. For example, I am in a World of Dungeon game for several years. Character creation can be done within a matter of minutes. We're talking, all you do is roll a couple dice, choose your class, and get your gold in a hireling. That's all you need, and you're ready to start playing. Whereas, say, playing Traveler 2E, you need to create your character with other people at the table, and connect your character's backstory with other people, and roll for the careers several times, and for any newbie player, that could take hours. Seriously. If you don't have anything to automatically generate your character, you could be taking hours out of your day to create one single character. And don't get me wrong, I think Traveler 2E is super fun, and I love playing it when I get the chance. But I would not call that game rules light because character creation is super time consuming, and we're not even talking about one of the biggest parts of Traveler 2E, the lore, which I think is another caveat to a rules light game. Rules light games generally don't have heavy lore, or the lore is very much what the GM brings to the table. Literally, or, well, not literally. Finally, I also think it depends on the setting. If your game includes a setting, is that inherently rules light? No. But, like I said before with Traveler 2E, if you have loads of worlds, concepts, politics, social history, and even economies in your setting, then I would argue that is a lot to consume for any newbie or even veteran who's getting into that RPG. So I would call that not a rules-light game. Of course, I think ability and mental faculties are also things we need to take into consideration when we're talking about what is a rules-light game. How I understand, say, the PHB for D&D 5e is going to be different than for, say, someone who might be deaf, or someone who might not be able to speak, or someone who has ADHD, or someone who has dyslexia. Those are things we need to take into account when we're trying to understand the source material. And while many books have ways to make more games accessible, and there's loads of safety tools and materials online to make all of your RPGs, especially D&D 5e, more accessible, we need to understand that ability can play a big role in what defines a rules-light game. While what might seem simple for some is not simple for everyone, and that's something that all GMs and players need to acknowledge. Overall, a rules-light game can depend on the person and group, but I do think some commonalities hold. For instance, a game should have an easy memorization and be easily understood when you're playing the game. The rules shouldn't be too complicated, and you shouldn't have to reference multiple source books or multiple books to create a character or understand a specific rule, and hopefully, if that's not the case, it doesn't bog your game down. Finally, resolutions mechanically should rely on 1 or 2 dice rather than a multitude of dice. For instance, just rolling 1d6 or 2d6, or only 1d20 or a couple of d20s, for say, combat, or for say, a social encounter. Of course, I could be wrong, and I very well might be, because this is a topic that people have several different opinions on. What do you think defines a rules-light game? Am I wrong? What do you think about the topic on ability and, say, one's mental faculties? Let me know down below in the comment section. And if you like this content, be sure to like. And if you disliked it, be sure to dislike. And as always, everyone, I'm your average of the day queer host, Blurry Disposition, and I hope you all have an awesome day. Ciao!